Here is part 5 of my 2017 PFA season recap. Last time I finished out the National Conference by talking about the National West, and this time I'm going to be talking about the Century Conference, starting off with the Century East, which consists of the Pittsburgh Blitz, Baltimore Charms, Cincinnati Colts, Buffalo Sabres, and Columbus Barons. So, let's get into it. So we start off the video with the Columbus Barons. For the second year in a row, they were dead last in the division. And of course, remember last year they were 2-16. They tied the Louisville Saints for the worst record in the league. And of course, I didn't really think they were going to go far during the season. And of course, they start off 0-4. But then something incredible happened. This team went 6-1 after that. In fact, at near the 7 weeks remaining, they were 6-5 and actually leading the division. They were in the playoffs at the season ended at that point during the year. But in the end, they lost out except for the season finale, finished 7-11 out of the playoffs, 5th seed once again in the division. But of course, it still was a major turnaround from last year. Oh my god, they were really bad last year. Offensively, you can see, offensively, they were pretty damn good. In fact, I'm looking at it right now, they actually scored the second most points in their division. Even Pittsburgh, the division leader and runner-up in PFA Bowl 2, didn't score as many points as Columbus did. So that's quite an impressive feat. But, as you see, defensively, they were not good at all. They were pretty bad. Except their pass defense, which was pretty damn good. But then again, when you're in a division that has terrible offensive performances from Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Buffalo, that's kind of expected. So what could Columbus do to possibly finally fix their woes and finally make a playoff appearance? Well, Albert Hedrick, their quarterback, his play was kind of disappointing, but at the same time, he missed 7 games due to injury, so that's not really good. That's almost half the season, so he's got to stay healthy for him to have any shot, because that offense was pretty potent when he was in, and when he was not in, not so much. And one problem that they had last year was they had no running game whatsoever. But this year with their second overall pick, Reginald Hawkins, oh my god, he put up almost 400 carries in the season for over 1,300 yards. That was explosive. So now they finally got a running game to complement their passing offense. So looks like Columbus in the next bunch of years actually could be possibly like the more elite offenses in that division. But then again, this division's terrible with offense, so it's probably not too much of a surprise. And they have a good trio of wide receivers, especially young and such. So they got a lot of weapons to work with, so probably the main thing they got to fix is their defense and stay healthy. But this team could be competitive. In fact, they were 500 in both their division and in their conference. So they were pretty competitive when it mattered most in their division and their conference. They just need to get a little bit more consistent with their offense and fix their defense and stay healthy. And maybe they could be a possible wild card contender maybe in the conference, or maybe even a contender for the division next year. But the future looks pretty damn bright for Columbus, especially how it was last year. Next up on the list, the Buffalo Sabres. And holy crap, this team was all over the place last year, went 9-9, and this year, oh my god, they were freaking terrible. I mean, look at those stats. They were all over the place this year. They actually, I think, overachieved if you think about it. Offensively, look how terrible they were offensively. They were dog shit. They were like really bad at every single category. Defensively, they played a little bit better, except their run defense, which was the worst in the league. And honestly, the way they played, they came across to me as like one of the worst teams in their conference. Their quarterback, Ricky Bailey, had an awful year 2. Barely even completed 60% of his passes, just 12 touchdowns to 12 interceptions. Talk about a major decline from last year. And they don't have a running game really, nor a main threat wide receiver. So, honestly, Buffalo really probably should set themselves up as a possible defense mainly team and rebuild that offense, because they need to get a whole bunch of pieces together before they could be anywhere near competitive in that division, let alone the conference. So, It was a very disappointing year for Buffalo, and honestly, they overachieved. The fact that they went 8-10 despite all these flaws is quite an accomplishment. And I think in 2018 is when they're going to really fall off a cliff and come back down to where they probably should be, like around where Columbus was last year. Next up on the list is a very interesting team that we're going to have to really keep our eyes on in 2018, and that's the Cincinnati Colts. Of course, last year they went 5-13, finished the year with a 3-game winning streak, and I didn't really think much about them. I didn't think they were going to really do much this year, but no, ho boy, they made a lot of noises. In fact, they started off the year 4-2, including beating Pittsburgh one time, and they actually led the division. In fact, for a good part of the year, they actually did lead the division, believe it or not. They played really well, although after that 4-2 start, they kind of crapped the bed after that. They managed to get back to 5-5, but after that, it was really nothing at all, and they ended up finishing 8-10. But hey, that was a massive improvement from last year, and they actually scored more than they allowed, which is quite impressive, because look at those stats offensively. This team regressed offensively, at least. Last year, they were pretty, I wouldn't say good, but at least solid offensively. But they fell apart this year. Defensively, however, oh my god, what a massive jump. This is an elite defense. One of the best defenses in the league. This is like up there with Birmingham and Chicago in terms of stats. 5th most in points allowed. 5th most yards allowed. 4th best pass defense, and 3rd best run defense. Because remember, last year, if I remember correctly, as I'm looking up the stats right now, I think Cincinnati actually had the 5th best run defense last year. Still looking it up. 16th place. Okay, so they didn't. So their defense was as good last year. All of a sudden, had this massive jump this year. That was unbelievable. And this team had 7 losses that were within a score. So you know what that means. If they could have won maybe half of those games, depending on who they beat, they could have been in the playoffs maybe. If they won all those games, not only would they have been in the playoffs, they would have had home field advantage all wrapped up. This team is scary in 2018. But, of course, the main thing that could threaten them from making any noise next year is that terrible offense. Walter Morgan, who was their backup last year, who came into the scene to replace Robert Richardson, did not play good at all this year, was not good at all. So they're probably going to need to get a new quarterback. And, of course, another problem is Quentin Pearson, their good running back who played better. He's going to be 33 next year. He's up there in age. They need to probably find eventually someone younger to replace him. And, of course, Griffin John, their wide receiver, did not play as good this year as he did last year, so that's going to be a little bit of a problem, too. They got a lot of holes to fill in that offense. But this team reminds me a little bit like a weaker version of Pittsburgh, which I'll get to later on. So if they could just fix their offense, shit, they could be a playoff team. Maybe they could even challenge Pittsburgh and Baltimore with the division supremacy, because I think Columbus still has a long time to go, and I think Buffalo's going to go backwards. So, pretty good season for Cincinnati, and looks like the future very bright for them if they can fix their woes for next year. Next up, of course, is a very disappointing team. That was the Baltimore Charm. Oh my god, remember that incredible year they had last year? They went 13-5. They had the best they were the best wild card team ever to make the playoffs, and they beat the New Orleans in the wild card round and almost beat Chicago on the road in the division round. I thought, holy shit, this team is going to be a legit contender for PFA Bowl 2. In fact, I predicted them to play in PFA Bowl 2. I don't remember who I predicted they would win or not, but I predicted them to go all the way there. But nothing went right for them. Just like Denver, they just disappointed. They won their first game, but then they lost 4 in a row. All of them all of them within a score, too. It was so bad. They just could not win out. They tried to recover. They tried to remain around 500, which, of course, in that week, Century East was pretty damn good to win the division, but they just could not keep up with anyone. They could not keep up with Pittsburgh, and they just kept losing out and missed the playoffs and had a losing season. So, yeah, that was a very disappointing season for Baltimore. Because, I mean, statistically, when you look at their stats, they did regress, but they still overall played a lot better than an 8-10 team. They played more like a over 500 team. So they should have could have maybe gotten into the playoffs perhaps. As I'm looking at their stats right now, they lost 5, 6, 7, 8 of their 10 losses were within a score. Just think about that. They could have possibly gone all the way up to 6-2 perhaps. That is how close it was for them to just make it into the playoffs. And they just blew it. And of course, it doesn't help when they have a really tough schedule too, outside the Century East. And I really don't think there's much Baltimore needs to do really to get back into playoff contention, because they are loaded with talent. Their quarterback, Andrew Lassiter, put up another incredible season. Their running back, Raymond Mackey, did not play as good, but he was still really elite. Or not elite, but up there is one of the better running backs. Ariel Leary had an awesome season, but the only problem is that he's like the main receiver on the team, and they need someone else to maybe complement him. And Timothy Dawson, their second best receiver, is good, but nowhere near as good. So maybe that's one thing they probably should look into, maybe getting a wide receiver in the draft. And they still have their studs on defense. Curtis Dick, Juan Pike, and all of them. So this team really is set still to be a playoff team and possibly a PFA Bowl contender. It's just this year they just kept losing games that they were not supposed to lose. And you can see that with the fact that 8 of their 10 losses were within a score. So they kind of were like a reverse of Buffalo, where Buffalo overachieved for being a terrible team. Baltimore underachieved for being a much better team that they should have been. So it was a really disappointing season for Baltimore, but their talent base is still there, so they could easily get right back into playoff contention in 2018. They just gotta not squander it this time around, especially since you got Cincinnati coming up, Columbus is coming up, but Pittsburgh, even though they regressed too, they're gonna be a threat too. So Baltimore's gonna have a lot of competition, unlike last year, unlike 2016. So they gotta really work hard to be on top of that division if they want to make it back to the playoffs. And finally, we talk about the division winner and the runner-up to the PFA Bowl 2, the Century Conference champion, Pittsburgh Blitz. Of course, remember last year they went 13-5. They had first-round bye in the Century Conference, and they were the runner-up in the Century Conference championship to the Chicago. And they thought that their offense was the main weakness of why they couldn't make it. So they actually, remember, drafted in the first round Gerald Putman to be their future quarterback. And oh boy, he got pushed in really quickly, because the start of the year, Pittsburgh was just flat out falling apart. They were 2-4. Their offense played so bad. Their quarterbacks, Cruz Tolbert, Billy White, who both played pretty solid last year, just failed spectacularly bad. That Gerald Putman, who was raw, had to be pushed in. And he really did not play really good, but he was all over the place. So he had some good games too. So he salvaged a terrible season maybe for Pittsburgh. And they got back within around 500, but it still was not looking good for them, even though they were in a very weak division. But they managed to turn it around. They ended up winning all but one, their final game of the season, to win out, still make the playoffs and win the division. But this time as the 4th seed, so they had to go win 3 games this time to make it to the conference championship. I mean, PFA Bowl 2, but they came up to the challenge. They beat Oklahoma in overtime. That was a hard-fought game. Then they went on the road and beat Chicago again like they did during the season, got their revenge for the conference championship loss last year. And then, in the conference championship, they were down El Paso 17-0 going to the 3rd quarter, and they did it, still winning it in overtime. I mean, in the 4th quarter. Unbelievable. But then when it got to PFA Bowl 2, even though they were the home team, that was home field advantage against them, since Manhattan was at home basically when they were playing that, and they just fell flat on their face offensively. They couldn't get anything going, lost 23-7, and squandered one hell of a miracle Cinderella run to get their first title. Now, yeah, they did make it to the PFA Bowl 2, so that is an improvement from last year where their finish was, but this team was, I think, worse than it was last year. I mean, just look at their stats. They were 36 in yards offensively. They were 37th in passing offense. Their running game was 20th, so it was in the middle of the pack, so that's pretty good. They actually overachieved in terms of points. They were 27th in scoring, so that's pretty damn good for that regard. Now, this defense, however, played legit lights out. Fourth best scoring defense, 4th defense in yards, 5th best pass defense, and the number 1 run defense in the league. And matter of fact, as I'm looking up their stats right now, they actually played better defensively than they did even last year. Oh my God, last year they had one of the worst passing defense in the league, and they ended up having one of the elite defenses. So this defense actually played even better, which they needed to in order to make any playoff run like they did this year. But of course, the main concern and main thing Pittsburgh needs to worry about if they want to have any shot to make it to PFA Bowl free next year to win their first title is Gerald Putman. He played the majority of his rookie year because of his other quarterbacks being so terrible. And like I said, he was not good. As I'm looking at his stats right now in his rookie season, he completed just 58% of his passes, 11 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. That is pretty damn bad. He averaged less than 200 yards a game. So if Pittsburgh wants to have any shot to really contend and win it next year, he has to play better than this. This was pretty bad. This was even worse than Cruz Tolbert or Billy White played last year. That's saying something, too. So he needs to play much better, because they got their other offensive talent. Frederick Robinson, their running back, went up there as one of the best. And Gary Berry, one of the best wide receivers in the league. They have the talent. He just needs to perform. And hopefully in year 2, he will do that. Because if he doesn't, then they're going to have major blunders. And you're going to problems next year. And you're going to wonder if maybe they consider him as a bust. Which would be very sad if that was the case. So congratulations, Pittsburgh, for being runner-up in PFA Bowl 2, which you made this year unlike last year, but in the end, it was just a disappointing finish, and you know you could have probably won that if you just had offense to complement you. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. As I finish talking about the Century East, next time out, I will talk about the Century Central, which consists of the Chicago 71ers, Oklahoma Oilers, Detroit Engines, Minneapolis Kitsune, and Kansas City Hammerheads. Now, of course, it'll probably take a while before I get to this video because I haven't worked on any of these teams yet, unlike last time, so hopefully it won't take too long because I'm having fun getting to work on these teams again. I want to get, hopefully soon, to work on the 2018 season. So, see you guys then for the Century East.